In number 5, we're asked to label the diagram. So let's look at part A. In part A, we have vector W plus vector E. So we have to remember that when we're adding, the technique that we're using on our graph is called tip to tail. Tip to tail. So looking at our vectors, each arrow is a tip, and there's only 2 vectors that line up tip to tail. And they're here, the one that I just marked in green, and then this one in blue. They line up tip to tail. The order for the addition is that the tip of the first vector must touch the tail of the second. First we travel along W, then we travel along E. If we're starting here, first we travel along W, then we turn and travel along E. So this vector at the bottom will be W, and this vector off to the side is going to be vector E. Looking at B, C plus D. Again, we're looking for tip to tail. So this is going to be the first vector, and then we're going to turn to the second vector. So here's C, and here's D. Those are the only 2 vectors that are tip to tail. Part C, R plus S, so another tip to tail. Here's the tip to tail location. So following the path in the order, the first vector has to be R, and the second vector has to be S. When we get to the second set of problems, we're doing subtraction. And there are 2 techniques for subtraction. We can either go tip to tip, or we can go tail to tail. Because there's 2 ways to do this, there will be 2 correct answers. It doesn't matter which correct answer you give, as long as you give a correct answer. Let's start with talking about tip to tip. If you're going to go tip to tip, the answer needs to point to the second vector. So if we do k minus m, tip to tip, the answer has to point to m. Look at the picture. There's only 2 vectors that are tip to tip. They're right here. So one of those is k, one of those is m. The answer, because we're doing tip to tip, has to point to m. So here's my answer. I'll highlight this one in green. And it's pointing downward. So this vector has to be m, which means that the other vector, where their tip to tip, is going to be k. You also could have done tail to tail. If you're going to do tail to tail, the answer is going to point to the first vector. So now the answer will point to k. I'm going to erase this so you can see what's happening here. If we do tail to tail, here are the 2 vectors that are tail to tail right here. And the answer will be the third vector, and it's pointing that way. And in tail to tail, you have to point towards the first vector. So this will be k, and now this will be m over here. So in both scenarios, k was this vector here at the top. So m could have been either one, depending on if you're doing tip to tip or tail to tail. All right, so let's try part E. We have vector t minus vector u. We do tip to tip. Then we're going to be using those 2 vectors there. And tip to tip means that the answer has to point towards u. So here's the answer, which means that here's the answer here, pointing this way, which means the top vector must be u, and the other vector must be t. This is one correct answer. If you're going to do tail to tail, I'll do that one in green. If you're going to do tail to tail, then you have to use these 2 vectors in green here, and the answer is going across the top, and the answer has to point towards t. So t doesn't move, but u will move. I'll put that in green. All right, so either the blue answer, tu, or the green answer, tu, is correct. I would suggest that you just pick one method, tip to tip or tail to tail, and then you consistently use that method. All right, last one, f minus h. Let's use tip to tip. Here's the 2 tips touching each other. Here's the answer. Tip to tip means we have to point towards the second one. We have to point towards h, which means that the other vector has to be vector f. Or we can do tail to tail. I'll do it in green again. If you're doing tail to tail, you point towards f. So the 2 tails are right here, which means this is the answer, and it's pointing towards f. So this will remain f over here, which will make this other vector down here h. Again, either the blue answer or the green answer is correct.